Ethical considerations are important considerations in research in general, but these are more important in research that involves human subjects. So social science research that involves human subjects, especially experimental research, where there is control and manipulation of the human behavior in a controlled environment, we need to be particularly concerned about keeping in view the ethical considerations that are associated with experimental research. So in this presentation, we will briefly discuss the ethical considerations that we need to take care of when we are conducting research with human subjects. Now, first, generally, ethical considerations are actually principles and practices that make the process of research ethical. Remember that the process of research needs to be based on ethical considerations. If ethical considerations are violated, that will make the process and outcomes of research invalid. So generally, ethical considerations involve the process that follows established moral norms and values associated with research in a particular field. There could be a variety of moral norms and values associated with different fields of research, especially research in social sciences. Why do we need to have to consider the ethical side of research? Is because it makes the process of research a genuine and authentic attempt at exploring and promoting the cause of scientific knowledge. So now there are certain ethical considerations that are particularly important in experimental research. So there are some considerations that are that need to be followed in all sorts of research, but then there are some that are distinct. Here is a list that include both the general considerations that we need to take care of in research in general, especially research involving human subjects, but also some that are particular to experimental research. So generally in experimental research, we need to we need to be more careful, mainly because in experimental research, there is a controlled environment in which the research is taking place, and the nature of the experiments is that these take place in controlled environment. And so in controlled environment, because it's not happening in a natural environment or in a natural setting generally, there is the potential impact that such controlled environment or experimental environment can have on participants. So that is why experimental research, as we know that it often involves manipulating of variables related to the control of human behavior, such as maybe social control or maybe political or economic control, maybe it is physical control or psychological manipulation. So manipulating variables impacting human behavior or human thinking or feelings is an important aspect of experimental research. Secondly, experimental studies often study cause and effect relationships, and so these can actually raise unique concerns in comparison to the other fields or other types of research in social sciences. Here are some important considerations that we need to take care of when we are conducting experimental research in social sciences. The first is informed consent. So this actually means that the participants need to be informed about the research aims and objectives, their involvement, the type of experience that they have to go through, or the type of conditions that they have to face during the process of the experiment. That is why it is important that the participants or the subjects are well informed about their participation, the what, the why, and the how of their participation. Secondly, the participation should be voluntary. So there should be no element of coercion or force or you can say intimidation or whatever. The participation should be entirely voluntary, and the participants should participate on their own free will. Then confidentiality and privacy are important considerations, mainly because human behaviors are generally observed in a controlled environment. Therefore, it is important that the information that is coming through or the kind of involvement that the participants have, it should be kept confidential, and their privacy should be protected. In many cases, in the absence of confidentiality and privacy, what can happen is that respondents could be exposed to certain dangers. So that's why it is important that these considerations are taken care of. Next is the right to withdraw. It is something that is related to the voluntary participation, where the participants agree and the researchers give them the choice to withdraw from the process of research at any time without any repercussions or any implications. Next, the possible deception. In many cases, it happens, although there should be no concept of discipline in research, no concept of deception in research, because research basically is an authentic, genuine, and honest attempt at exploring phenomena in a controlled environment. But in some cases, if for example, the participants know about entirely about everything related to the aims and objectives of the research, they might in that case change their behavior, and their behavior might not be artificial, might not be original, or rather it could be artificial. So in that case, there could be, the researcher might decide that, especially in the beginning of the research process or when the experiment is going on, the participants do not know entirely about the implications of their participation or the treatment that they are passing through. So there might be a possible deception in order to get to the real knowledge, or the real thing, that the actual thing that the researcher is interested in. Therefore, there could be an element of deception, you can say, but that should be kept minimum, and there should be, again, in order to minimize possible implications or maybe possible negative implications for the participants, there could be post-experiment debriefing or emotional support. In some cases, for example, the researcher might not tell the whole picture, because that could change the behavior, or that could lead the participants to behave in different ways. But the experiment could have certain emotional implications, and so it is important for the researcher to have a post-experiment debriefing or emotional support for the participants to deal with that kind of ethical issue. Justice, very important that the participants or the subjects get their rights, and also justice in terms of the inclusion and exclusion criteria is something that is extremely important. So this is an important ethical consideration. Then there could be possible risks, harm, or possibility of safety issues to the participants. It is therefore important for the researcher to take care of the possible risks and to avoid possible harms, whether it's psychological, whether it's physical, economic, or social harm that could come the way of the participant. So safety of the participant is an extremely important ethical consideration. Authentic reporting of the experiment and its findings and its conclusions and its implications are extremely important. There is also need for acknowledgement of the control or experimental environmental impact. In some cases, the participants might behave in a possibly different way in natural settings, but in an experimental or controlled environment, there might be slight changes to their behavior that might impact the way the researcher comes up with their conclusion and reporting of the real situation. So it is important that the report is authentic, that the manipulated environment or the contrived environment is entirely elaborated in the research process, so that the reader has an idea of the real and authentic environment in which the researcher has come up with those findings and conclusions. And lastly, the researcher has social responsibility in terms of generalizability of the research. So it is important that the researcher takes responsibility before they generalize their findings to a natural, to a general environment. In many cases, again, this is something related to the previous point, where authenticity might be compromised if a contrived or controlled environment is entirely generalized to a natural or on a natural or a social level. So that is why the researcher needs to take responsibility in terms of coming up with authentic reports, but also they should look at the possible ramifications of their research findings if they generalize and report that on a mass level. So these are important ethical considerations related to research in general, but specifically to research in experimental context, where there is need for more care, mainly because of the involvement of human subjects and mainly because of the possible social, possible economic, psychological, or physical implications for research participants or subjects.